The Girl from Newlyn, my autobiography. There's not much I remember about starting school, only it was a long walk, but I do remember the lady with the caraway seed cake. It was at least 2 or 3 times a week after school. She would be at her garden gate with a slice of seed cake for me and one each for my 2 friends. How I hated caraway seeds. She expected us to have a mouthful or 2 before she went indoors. I just managed a nibble or 2 and would wait to get away to throw the rest over the hedge. I also remember at the same age standing on the garden hedge and looking down at my feet. I saw my socks covered in ants. I was standing on an ant's nest. I started to scream and stamp my feet. The more I stamped, the more the ants came from the nest. I was finally rescued by my mother. My father worked at Geaver Mine. It was a tin mine at that time. We had a black Labrador dog called Rover, and each morning when he was left out, he would tear off to the mine, and if he could get into the shed where the miners hung their dinner bags, he would select my father's bag and bring it back home, sandwiches and all. We lived in a granite cottage when my father was a miner. We lived there for 2 years and had to move because the tin load was running underneath the house, and when the dynamite blasting took place, the house would shake. It became unsafe to live there. That's when my father went back to farm labouring. My father was reared on a farm, and farming was in his blood. From then on, we always lived in a tight cottage belonging to the farmer who he worked for at the time. We would move house at least once a year, not because my father got the sack, because he was hot-tempered, would row with the boss over some trivial matter. And Dad would tell him what to do with his job. So the next day, he would go to another farm and get another job. And so once again, we would move to another tight cottage. He never did have any problem getting a job. He was a good cowman and knew his job. He was also a good horseman, looking after and working shire horses. Seeing we were not moving very far, the farmer of his next job would send a horse and wagon around to carry our furniture on. Not that we had very much, only the bare essentials. The little we did have was loaded onto a wagon and lashed down with rope, and place would be found somewhere on the load for us kids to ride. If it rained, a tarpaulin would be tied over the wagon to cover the furniture. When we got to the next house, that was to be our home, the furniture was unloaded. I would see my mother looking at the windows, and I would know she was wondering if the curtains were going to be of any use. More often than not, the curtains would not fit. They were often too short because of being cut down to fit in the windows of the last house, or they were too narrow as the windows were wider than before. It was the same with the floor covering. The lino would sometimes fit, sometimes not. We only had lino in the front room. In the other rooms downstairs, the floors were stone and were bare. We did have a rug or 2 sometimes that my mother would make from rags. She would tear strips of rags from old coats and thread them through hessian sacks. Or she would cut long strips, plait them and sew them together, forming a circle. Every time Father moved house, we children had to change schools. More often than not, the school would be 2 or 3 miles from where we lived. Only once there was transport. It was known as a school bus. but in fact it was a converted cattle lorry. There were steps to get into the back and wooden seats around the sides. I attended the same school twice or sometimes 3 times over my school years. I think the teachers began to think we were gypsies. With a reputation of always being on the move, the teachers did not bother with us. I left school at 14, just about able to spell my own name and read 1 or 2 or 3 word letters. I knew nothing of arithmetic. What I excelled at in school was needlework and games, but did know a lot about nature and the countryside and farming.